Could the dollar lose its reserve status? That is the question that we're going to try to answer on this week's update. I'm Ian King. If you have not subscribed to our channel yet, please subscribe. If you like what I have to say in this webinar, please smash that like button, and always feel free to leave a comment. We'd love to hear your viewpoint on this. So the question is the US going to lose its status as the world's global reserve? Specifically, will the US dollar lose its status as the world's global reserve? And before we answer that question, we have to ask ourselves, why is the dollar the global reserve? And second, what could the possible alternatives be? And so let's just talk about why the US dollar became the global reserve. It all started back during World War I. And at that time, foreign countries were buying goods during the war from the US with gold. And at the end of World War I, the United States became the largest holder of gold, and we still are to this day. And so countries decided that rather than pegging their currency after the war to gold, they could just peg it to the US dollar because the US dollar was backed by gold. And then when World War II happened, in the aftermath of that, you had the Bretton Woods Agreement, which allowed any country in the world essentially to peg itself to the US dollar. You also had Europe was a mess after World War II. Asia was a mess. And so you had the Marshall Plan in Europe, where the US would lend money, which circulated more dollars around Europe. And then also the Ford Plan in Asia, where the US was lending money to Japan to rebuild its economy. And this really solidified the US dollar as the global reserve. And we've seen, that this interest has compounded over years, where the US has the deepest capital markets. We have the safest treasury markets. We are the place that people go to when there is chaos in the world. The flight to safety happens to the US dollar and US treasuries. And so what could possibly be the alternative? Well, the issue right now, before we talk about the alternative, is that the US debt levels are running at the highest percent of GDP since World War II. We're about 125% debt to GDP levels. And people are really worried about what the US economy is going to look like in the future. So what are your alternatives? You want to dump dollars, you want to buy something else? Well, the first suggestion would be to go over and buy euros, but then you look at that continent and their economies are running similarly high debt levels. And 10 years ago, the Eurozone was in danger of breaking up because of what was happening in Southern Europe with Portugal, Ireland, Greece, and Spain, and all those housing markets blowing up. And then the other alternative could possibly be you can dump your dollars and you can buy Chinese yuan. But China has the same issues that we have. Their debt to GDP is even higher. They don't even report accurate numbers, so it's hard to tell. But they're running similar high debt levels, so you don't want to go there. But there is an alternative, and I do think that there is a scenario that could play out over the next decade, over the next couple decades. And that is that an alternative currency, a cryptocurrency, what have you, would replace the dollar as being the global reserve. And there's a couple of reasons why this might happen. Number one, the younger generations are more confident in holding Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies than they are in holding their own domestic currency. They don't like their governments. They don't trust their governments. They don't trust the banking system. And a lot of them feel like they've just been sort of left behind by society. The average 22-year-old has a huge amount of college debt, and the job market for them is not as lucrative as it was for people who are entering the workforce 20, 30, and 40 years ago. But there's something even bigger, I think, here with cryptocurrencies, and this goes beyond Bitcoin. It's the idea that we live in this new digital age, and most of our lives are on the internet. The average person spends 9 hours a day on the internet. And now we've had this internet now for about 30 years. And we've had cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, a little over 10 years, Ethereum, about 7 years. But we have this unit of account, this cryptocurrency that can help us price digital resources, digital assets. And I think what you have to really be thinking about is what makes a currency great? Why did the US dollar become the world's reserve, there's three things. There's a store of value. US dollar is a store of value. It's a medium of exchange where, people accept US dollars when you want to spend them. And it's also a unit of account. There are goods all over the world that are priced in US dollars, which has made it the global reserve for so long. But now, as we move towards digital societies, as our life turns more towards digital, we have a cryptocurrency called Ethereum, among other what are called layer ones, that are essentially the building blocks for a new web, this so-called Web 3. And Ethereum is really interesting because it fulfills a part of being a currency that the dollar doesn't now. A dollar can just be created by banks to extend credit. The banks can create it. The central bank will give the bank's reserves and they can go create a dollar. And it's not backed by anything. There's a lot of leverage in the system. Ethereum is backed by the computational power of the network. And what I mean by that is to use any of these new digital resources that are being built, whether that is buying, selling, or creating NFTs, whether that's using decentralized finance, or now you can buy cloud storage in a decentralized fashion. You can buy network bandwidth using Ethereum. And so you have all these use cases for Ethereum that it's kind of like if you were able to create a currency that had, was essentially attached to oil or some form of energy. And we don't have that in the real world. And this can only be done because there's no tangible asset here that it has to be backed by, right? I mean, we tried having a currency that was backed by gold, but that didn't work out. Nixon abrogated the gold treaty in the early 70s. And this is why I think Ethereum really has a shot in the next decade to replace, most global currencies. This is just danger for centralized societies, because what is a dollar? It's basically a form of control, because the government can print as much dollars that they want. They can tax you for how many dollars that they want. They can set the level of interest rates on how much it costs for you to borrow dollars or how much for you to lend dollars. But this is a whole new system. And Ethereum lets anyone who has a computer to basically join. It's permissionless, it's open source. And I think that if there ever was a shot for a currency, an alternative currency, to take over dollar hegemony, this exorbitant privilege that the dollar has had for so long, I think it's Ethereum. And, that's why I'm so excited about what's ahead for the crypto markets, not only because, all of this building that's happening in what's called Web 3, this new creation of an internet that's owned and governed by the users, but also the macroeconomic impact of it. Because when you have an alternative currency, when you have an alternative that people can own instead of their own currency, it's going to cause governments to be not only a little more useful, but a little more honest and transparent with the way they tax and how they're accountable. So would love to hear what you think about that. I know this might have come out from left field and might not be something you're thinking about too clearly, but I know that there is a lot of resistance going on. A lot of people are really concerned about whether or not the dollar is going to continue to be the world's global reserve. And I think that the threat's not from China, it's not from the Eurozone, it's not from Canada, what have you, but the threat to the US dollar's reserve status is from cryptocurrencies, not Bitcoin, but from Ethereum or other layer one assets that are rebuilding our digital lives on chain and creating this new Web 3. So that's it for this week's video. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and I'll talk to you next week. Take care.